The hardest heartbreak isn't falling in love with your best friend. It's realizing they only become afraid of losing you when someone else finally notices you. If anyone had asked me what home felt like, I would have said it looked exactly like Liam Brooks leaning against the hood of his aging pickup truck outside my apartment every Saturday morning, coffee in one hand and an extra cup waiting for me in the other. We had been best friends for almost 15 years, long enough that people stopped asking whether we were brothers and started assuming we simply came as a pair. We watched the same football games every fall, argued over the best burger place in town every Friday night, and somehow always ended up taking the same hiking trails every spring, even though Liam complained about every steep climb. He complained because that was part of who he was, but he never once canceled. Looking back now, I wonder if all those little routines meant something different to him than they did to me. At the time, they just felt normal. They felt permanent. That Monday morning started like every other one. I unlocked the front door of the marketing agency where we both worked, balancing my laptop bag while trying not to spill coffee across my shirt. Liam was already inside, pretending to organize client folders while secretly waiting for me to arrive. "You're 3 minutes late," he said without looking up. "That's because you keep choosing coffee shops with impossible parking," I answered. He smirked without denying it. That was Liam. Quiet, dry, predictable, comforting. I never had to wonder whether he would show up, because he always did. Around noon, our manager introduced someone new to the office. "Everyone, this is Noah Bennett. He's transferring from our Chicago branch." Noah smiled with the kind of confidence that immediately made people relax around him. He shook everyone's hand, remembered every name after hearing it once, and somehow managed to make even the awkward office introductions feel natural. When he reached my desk, he noticed the tiny model lighthouse sitting beside my computer. "Cape May?" he asked. I blinked in surprise. "Yeah, my grandparents used to take me there every summer." He laughed. "Mine too. Small world." For the next 10 minutes, we traded stories about beach vacations, seafood restaurants, and the ridiculous souvenir shops that somehow survived every tourist season. It was easy conversation, the kind that happened without trying. I barely noticed Liam standing across the room pretending to refill his water bottle for far longer than anyone needed. Later that afternoon, Noah stopped by again with 2 iced coffees. "I guessed vanilla," he said. "Hopefully I'm right." I smiled. "You guessed perfectly." Before I could thank him again, Liam appeared beside my chair. "Ethan," he interrupted, "weren't we supposed to finish those campaign revisions before 5? His voice sounded calm, but something about it felt strangely tight. "We still have plenty of time," I replied. "It'll only take an hour." Liam looked at Noah for a brief second before forcing a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Right, an hour." Then he walked away without another word. I watched him disappear into the conference room, confused by the tension I couldn't quite explain. Liam had never cared who I talked to before. He had never interrupted a conversation or acted impatient over something so small. I convinced myself he was probably stressed about work, but when I caught him glancing toward Noah and me for the 3rd time before the day ended, a strange thought crossed my mind. For the first time in all the years I had known him, Liam Brooks looked like someone who was afraid of losing something he had always believed would never leave. The rest of the week settled into a rhythm that should have felt ordinary, but every familiar routine carried a tiny shift that I could not ignore. Noah fit into the office faster than anyone expected. By Wednesday, he already knew everyone by name, remembered birthdays from the shared calendar, and somehow convinced half the department to join him for lunch at a food truck parked 3 blocks away. I found myself laughing more than usual, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because he had a way of turning simple conversations into memorable ones. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and never interrupted when someone else was speaking. It was refreshing. On Thursday afternoon, while waiting for a presentation to begin, Noah noticed the sketchbook sticking out of my backpack. He asked if I still drew landscapes, and I admitted that I had not made time for it in months. Instead of changing the subject, he spent the next several minutes telling me about a small weekend art festival opening downtown. "You should come," he said with an easy smile. "Even if you do not buy anything, it is worth walking around." Before I could answer, Liam appeared beside us carrying a stack of printed reports. "Ethan," he said, "the client wants the revisions before lunch tomorrow. We should probably stay focused." Noah immediately stepped back. "Sorry, I did not mean to steal him away. You did not, I replied, surprised by how quickly the conversation had ended. Liam simply nodded and walked toward the conference room without waiting for me. I caught up with him a few seconds later. You could have just told me you needed help, I said. I was going to come anyway. He shrugged without meeting my eyes. You looked busy. Talking for 5 minutes is not exactly being busy. Maybe not. His answer was quiet, almost careless, but something underneath it felt heavier than the words themselves. That evening we followed our usual Thursday tradition of grabbing burgers after work. Normally Liam filled every silence with sarcastic comments about terrible commercials playing on the television above the counter, or debated which football team would disappoint him first next season. This time he barely touched his fries. Everything all right? I finally asked. You have been acting strange all week. He looked out the window before answering. Have I? Yes. Maybe I am just tired. Liam. He let out a slow breath. Do you like the new guy? I laughed, thinking he was joking. Noah? Sure. He seems nice. Nice enough to replace old friends. The question landed so unexpectedly that I stared at him without speaking. Replace you? I repeated. Where is this even coming from? He reached for his drink, turning the cup slowly between his hands. Forget it. No, seriously. I have known you since middle school. Nobody replaces 15 years. He forced a smile, but it looked practiced rather than genuine. That is good to know. On Saturday morning my phone buzzed just after 8. It was Noah reminding me about the art festival. I hesitated before replying, then agreed to meet him for an hour. It sounded harmless. As I grabbed my keys, another message appeared. Liam, same breakfast place? Like always. I looked at both conversations on my screen, suddenly aware that for the first time in years my weekend routine was no longer automatic. I answered Liam first, telling him I would be running late because I had made another plan earlier that morning. 3 dots appeared almost instantly beneath his name, then disappeared. A full minute passed before his reply finally arrived. No problem. Have fun. The words were perfectly polite, but somehow they felt colder than anything Liam Brooks had ever said to me. The downtown art festival was exactly the kind of place that made time disappear. Local musicians played soft acoustic songs on the corner, while rows of white tents displayed paintings, handmade pottery, and photographs of quiet coastal towns that reminded me of childhood vacations. Noah wandered from booth to booth with genuine curiosity, stopping to compliment artists and asking questions that made them smile. He encouraged me to pick up my sketchbook again, insisting that people often abandon the hobbies that made them happiest simply because adulthood became too busy. I had not realized how much I missed drawing until I found myself studying the shadows beneath old brick buildings, mentally imagining how I would capture them with charcoal. For the first time in months, work felt very far away. Around noon, Noah suggested grabbing sandwiches from a nearby deli before heading home. We found a small table outside where the early autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from the cafe next door. We talked about our families, favorite road trips, and the strange jobs we had before joining the agency. Nothing about the conversation felt romantic. It was simply easy, comfortable, and free of expectations. When I reached for my drink, I happened to glance across the street and froze. Liam stood outside a sporting goods store holding a shopping bag in one hand. His eyes met mine for only a second before he looked away. I immediately stood up and waved. He gave a small nod, but did not cross the street. Instead, he turned and disappeared into the crowd before I could even call his name. The moment lingered in my mind long after Noah and I finished lunch. By Monday morning, Liam was already at the office, arriving earlier than usual. He greeted everyone with his familiar polite smile. But whenever Noah stopped by my desk, Liam somehow found another reason to interrupt. Sometimes it was to ask about a client file that could have waited. Sometimes it was to remind me about a meeting I already knew was on my calendar. Other times he simply appeared beside us without saying much at all, lingering just long enough to make the conversation awkward before quietly walking away again. It happened so often that even Noah finally noticed. During a coffee break, he leaned against the counter and asked carefully, "Has your friend always been that protective?" I frowned. Protective? Maybe protective is not the right word. He just seems uncomfortable every time we talk. I laughed softly, hoping it sounded more convincing than I felt. That is just Liam. He gets stuck in his own head sometimes. Noah nodded, but did not seem completely convinced. That afternoon, our manager announced that the entire department would attend a networking mixer on Friday evening with several partner companies. Everyone groaned about giving up part of a Friday night, but Noah immediately suggested we all go together to make it less boring. Before I could answer, Liam looked up from his computer. "Ethan already comes with me to those events," he said. The room became strangely quiet. I blinked at him. We usually just happen to drive together because we live close. Liam held my gaze for a second longer than usual before looking back at his screen. "Right, that is what I meant." Noah smiled politely and changed the subject, but the tension remained. As the workday ended, I packed my laptop. More slowly than usual, trying to understand why every ordinary conversation now seemed to leave someone disappointed. I still believed Liam was simply struggling with change, yet a small voice in the back of my mind kept asking the same question. If Noah had never walked into our office, would I have ever noticed how often Liam quietly stepped between me and everyone else? By the time Friday arrived, I had almost convinced myself that I was imagining everything. Liam had always been quiet, always a little stubborn, and maybe I was reading too much into a few awkward moments. That explanation felt reasonable until the networking mixer began. The event was held inside a renovated warehouse overlooking the river, with warm string lights hanging from the ceiling and local business owners scattered around tall tables discussing new projects. It was the kind of gathering where everyone smiled a little more than usual and exchanged business cards they would probably forget about by the following month. Our team stayed together at first, but as conversations naturally shifted, Noah and I found ourselves speaking with a creative director from another agency about community art programs and branding for local charities. The discussion was interesting enough that I completely lost track of time. Every now and then I caught myself looking around the room for Liam, expecting to find him nearby, but he was always somewhere else, speaking with clients or standing alone near the refreshment table with a glass of sparkling water in his hand. When the conversation finally ended, Noah laughed and nudged my shoulder lightly. "You know," he said, "you should really submit some of your sketches to the community exhibit next month. You keep talking yourself out of it." I smiled. "Maybe one day. Why not this year?" Before I could answer, Liam appeared beside us once again. "Ethan," he said, "our manager is looking for you." I turned toward the center of the room, immediately searching for her. "Where?" Liam hesitated for the briefest moment. "Actually, maybe she already found what she needed." Noah looked between us with visible confusion before politely excusing himself to refill his drink. As soon as he walked away, I folded my arms. "All right, what is going on?" Liam frowned. "Nothing. You have interrupted nearly every conversation I have had with Noah this week." "I have not been keeping count." "I have." He looked away toward the windows overlooking the river. "Maybe I just miss hanging out with my best friend." His answer softened my frustration almost instantly. I let out a quiet sigh. "Liam, if that is what this is about, you could have just told me. Would it have mattered?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course it would. You have been busy." "Busy does not mean gone." He nodded slowly but said nothing else. On the drive home that night, I could not stop replaying our conversation. Maybe I had unknowingly let our routines change too quickly. Noah was new, interesting, and easy to talk to, but Liam had been part of my life for so long that I had never considered he might actually feel left behind. The next morning I decided to fix it. I texted Liam and invited him to spend the afternoon watching college football at my apartment like we used to. His reply came only a few seconds later. "Sounds good. I will bring pizza." The familiar excitement in his message made me smile. For a while, everything felt normal again. We argued about quarterbacks, laughed at ridiculous commercials, and spent almost 3 hours talking about absolutely nothing important. Yet every time my phone buzzed with a message from Noah asking whether I had enjoyed the mixer or reminding me about the art exhibit, I noticed Liam glance toward the screen before quickly looking away. He never asked who was texting me. He never complained. He simply became quieter each time, as though every notification was another reminder that our comfortable little world was slowly making room for someone else, and neither of us truly understood what that change would eventually cost. The following week began with an unusual sense of balance, as if life had quietly decided to give all three of us room to breathe. Liam seemed more relaxed after our weekend together, and I was relieved to see his familiar sense of humor returning. He even joked with Noah during Monday's morning meeting, making everyone at the conference table laugh. I caught myself thinking that maybe the tension had finally passed, that perhaps we had all simply needed time to adjust. That hopeful feeling lasted until Thursday afternoon, when our department wrapped up a major campaign ahead of schedule. To celebrate, our manager announced an early finish and encouraged everyone to meet at a small rooftop cafe overlooking the city before heading home. The weather could not have been better. The late afternoon sun painted the buildings in shades of gold while a cool breeze drifted across the open terrace. Music played softly in the background as coworkers gathered around outdoor tables, sharing appetizers and talking about weekend plans. I stood beside the railing with Noah, looking out over the skyline, while discussing an upcoming photography exhibit that had just opened downtown. He showed me several pictures on his phone from previous exhibits, explaining how different lighting completely changed the mood of a photograph. I found myself genuinely interested, asking questions and laughing at one of his stories about getting lost in a museum for nearly 2 hours because he kept following the wrong tour group. Without thinking, I laughed harder than I had all week. Noah smiled and, in a completely natural gesture, rested his hand briefly on my shoulder while saying, "You really should come this weekend. I think you would love it." It lasted only a second. It was the casual kind of friendly gesture that happened every day between coworkers across America. But someone else saw it very differently. I noticed Liam, standing near the entrance to the rooftop, completely still. His expression did not show anger. It showed something far more painful, disappointment mixed with disbelief. For several long seconds, he simply watched us. Then he quietly placed his untouched drink on a nearby table, turned around, and walked toward the elevator without saying a single word. "Was that Liam?" Noah asked softly. I nodded. "I will be right back." I hurried across the rooftop, slipping through the closing elevator doors just before they shut. Liam stared straight ahead during the ride down, his hands buried inside his jacket pockets. The silence between us felt heavier than anything either of us had ever said. When the elevator reached the lobby, he stepped outside and headed toward the parking lot. "Liam," I called after him. He kept walking. "Liam, wait." He finally stopped beside his truck, but did not turn around. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked. He laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "Do you even have to ask?" I frowned in confusion. Noah touched her shoulder for 1 second. "That is all." He slowly faced me, and for the first time since we had met as teenagers, I could not read the expression in his eyes. "Exactly," he answered. It was only 1 second, and somehow it still felt like too much. I searched for the right response, but nothing came. My mind insisted he was talking about friendship, about old routines changing, about being afraid of drifting apart. Yet something in the way he looked at me refused to fit that explanation. Before I could speak again, Liam opened his truck door. "I think I should head home," he said quietly. "I need some time." He climbed inside, started the engine, and drove away before I could stop him. I stood alone in the parking lot long after his truck disappeared into the evening traffic, unable to shake the feeling that whatever had just broken between us had been fragile for much longer than I had ever realized. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Liam standing on the rooftop with that quiet, wounded expression before turning away without another word. I kept replaying every conversation from the past few weeks, searching for the exact moment everything had started to change. Had I really ignored his feelings that badly, or was I still misunderstanding what he had been trying to tell me? By sunrise, I had convinced myself that the only way to fix things was to talk to him honestly. I drove to his apartment before work, carrying 2 cups of coffee just like he had done for me countless Saturday mornings over the years. His pickup truck was already gone. He had left earlier than usual. At the office, Liam remained polite but distant. He greeted everyone with his usual calm voice, participated in meetings, answered emails, and discussed projects without missing a single deadline. The only difference was me. Every conversation between us became shorter than it had ever been. Every smile disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. It felt as though an invisible wall had appeared overnight, and neither of us knew how to climb over it. Around lunchtime, I finally walked to his desk. "Can we talk after work?" I asked quietly. He hesitated before answering. "If you want." "I do." "All right." The rest of the afternoon moved painfully slowly. Even Noah noticed that something was wrong. As we packed our bags, he stopped beside my desk. "Everything okay?" he asked. I forced a smile. Just trying to sort something out with Liam. Noah nodded thoughtfully. Good friends are worth difficult conversations. His words stayed with me all the way to the parking garage. Liam was already waiting beside his truck when I arrived. The evening air was cool, and the setting sun reflected across the rows of parked cars. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. I miss my best friend. Liam gave a small, tired smile. You still have him. Then why does it feel like I do not? He looked down at the pavement. Because I am trying to figure out how to stop wanting something I was never supposed to want. My heart skipped. What does that mean? He let out a slow breath and leaned against the side of his truck. Do you remember sophomore year of high school? The winter formal. I nodded immediately. You skipped it because you said school dances were embarrassing. He laughed softly. That was not the real reason. I frowned. Then what was? Because I watched another guy ask you to dance before I worked up the courage to do it myself. I stared at him, unsure whether I had heard correctly. Liam continued before I could respond. Then college came. Every time you started talking about someone you thought was interesting, I told myself it would pass. Every time you dated someone for a few weeks, I convinced myself I should be happy that you were happy. I kept believing the feeling would disappear if I ignored it. Long enough, he finally looked directly into my eyes, and there was no hiding behind jokes anymore. It never disappeared, Ethan. The parking garage suddenly felt impossibly quiet. I realized I was holding my breath. Liam, my voice barely came out above a whisper. When I saw Noah put his hand on your shoulder, I was not upset because someone else was talking to my best friend. I was upset because for 1 second I imagined someone else becoming the person who got to stand beside you for the rest of your life, and I could not bear the thought of it anymore. I stood completely still, every memory from the past 15 years rearranging itself inside my mind into something I had never been able to see before. Neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. The sounds of traffic from the street beyond the parking garage echoed through the silence, but everything else seemed to disappear. I searched Liam's face, hoping I would find some sign that this was all a misunderstanding, some clue that would let us go back to the simple friendship we had shared for so many years. Instead, all I saw was honesty, the kind that only appeared after someone had spent years hiding it. Liam looked away first. You do not have to say anything, he said quietly. Actually, I would rather you did not. I frowned. Why? He managed a small smile that looked more tired than happy. Because if you tell me you only see me as your friend, I will accept it. I will survive it. But I do not think I can hear the words tonight. Before I could answer, he reached for the truck door. Liam, wait. He paused without turning around. Please. He closed his eyes for a moment before facing me again. Ethan, I never wanted to make you feel guilty. None of this is your fault. You never promised me anything. I was the one who hoped for something more while pretending I was perfectly happy with what we already had. My chest tightened. Then why tell me now? Because I was tired of becoming someone I did not recognize. His voice remained calm, but every word carried years of quiet exhaustion. I hated feeling jealous every time someone made you laugh. I hated wondering whether every new person you met would become more important than me. Most of all, I hated pretending those feelings did not exist. He looked directly at me again. You deserve a friend who celebrates your happiness, not someone who secretly wishes every other guy would disappear. I shook my head immediately. That is not who you are. Maybe not, but it is who I was becoming. He slipped his truck keys into his pocket instead of starting the engine. I think the best thing I can do is give you some space. The words hit harder than I expected. Space. For a while. How long? He shrugged gently. Until seeing you smile with someone else does not hurt anymore. The thought of that future settled over me like a heavy weight. A future where Liam was no longer the first person I called after good news. No Saturday breakfasts. No spontaneous road trips. No football games with sarcastic commentary. The picture felt strangely empty, yet I still could not explain why. I do not want to lose you, I admitted. Liam smiled sadly. You already have not lost me. You just never realized how much of me you already had. He opened the truck door again, then hesitated one final time. Take care of yourself, Ethan. This time I did not stop him. I watched his truck disappear down the exit ramp until the taillights vanished into the evening traffic. The following days felt unfamiliar in ways I had never imagined. Liam requested to work remotely for the rest of the week, saying he needed uninterrupted time to finish a client proposal. The office suddenly seemed much quieter without him. His desk remained perfectly organized, his coffee mug untouched beside the monitor, and every time I looked in that direction, I instinctively expected him to be sitting there with one sarcastic comment ready to make me laugh. Noah noticed my distraction almost immediately. During lunch, he sat across from me and asked gently, "Have you heard from him?" I stared at my untouched sandwich before answering. "No." Noah nodded thoughtfully without pressing for details. Sometimes people step away because they are protecting themselves, not because they want to disappear. His words lingered in my mind for the rest of the afternoon, because for the first time since Liam confessed everything, I began to wonder whether the emptiness I felt was not simply the fear of losing my best friend. Maybe it was the realization that my happiest memories had always started with the same person standing beside me. The weekend arrived with a strange kind of silence. For years I had never needed to wonder what Saturday would look like, because Liam had always been part of it. We would meet for breakfast, argue over whether pancakes were better than waffles, wander through bookstores without buying anything, and somehow lose track of entire afternoons talking about dreams that seemed too distant to matter. Now my apartment felt unusually quiet. I found myself making 2 cups of coffee out of habit before realizing there was no reason to pour the second one. I carried my mug to the living room and noticed an old photo tucked inside a bookshelf. It had been taken during a hiking trip almost 8 years earlier. Liam stood beside me with windblown hair, laughing because I had nearly slipped into a shallow creek while trying to take a picture of the mountains. I smiled without thinking. Then another memory surfaced. My college graduation. Liam had driven nearly 400 miles through heavy rain because he refused to miss it. The time my car broke down outside town at midnight, he had arrived before the tow truck. When my grandfather passed away, Liam sat beside me through the entire memorial service without saying much at all, because he somehow knew silence was exactly what I needed. Memory after memory appeared with startling clarity, and a pattern slowly emerged that I had somehow overlooked for years. Whenever something important happened in my life, the first face I searched for had always been his. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Noah asking whether I still wanted to visit the photography exhibit we had discussed. I stared at the screen for several seconds before calling him instead. "Can I ask you something?" I said as soon as he answered. "Of course. Have you ever mistaken love for friendship?" Noah was quiet for a moment. "More people do than they realize." I let out a slow breath. "How do you know the difference?" His answer came gently, without hesitation. "Friendship makes your life better. Love quietly becomes part of how you imagine your future. When you picture the happiest version of your life, who is already standing there." The question settled deeply inside me. I thanked him, ended the call, and remained sitting in silence long after the screen went dark. I did not need days to answer it. I already knew. Every future I had ever imagined, every road trip, every holiday dinner, every celebration, every ordinary Saturday morning somehow included Liam without me ever consciously deciding it should. I had simply assumed he would always be there. I grabbed my keys before I could talk myself out of it and drove toward the lake where Liam often went whenever he needed time alone. As I approached the walking trail, I spotted his familiar pickup truck parked beneath a row of maple trees glowing with bright autumn colors. My heartbeat quickened. I found him sitting on the old wooden dock, watching gentle ripples move across the water as the late afternoon sun reflected across the surface. He heard my footsteps, but did not turn around immediately. "I thought you might be here," I said quietly. Liam smiled faintly at the lake. "You always knew where to find me." I stopped beside him, looking out across the calm water that had witnessed so many of our conversations over the years. This time, however, I had not come searching for my best friend because I was afraid of losing him. I had come because somewhere between all those ordinary moments we had shared, my heart had quietly chosen him long before my mind ever understood what it was doing. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The lake reflected the orange and crimson colors of the autumn trees, while a light breeze carried ripples across the water. Liam kept his eyes on the horizon as though he had already accepted whatever answer I had come to give. I realized then that he was trying to protect both of us. If I walked away, he would let me. If I chose friendship, he would carry that disappointment quietly, just as he had carried his feelings for years. I stepped closer, until we were standing side by side on the old wooden dock, where we had spent countless afternoons talking about everything from career dreams to favorite movies. "I owe you an apology," I said softly. Liam finally looked at me. You do not owe me anything. I do. I smiled faintly. Because you figured out your heart long before I figured out mine. His expression changed, but he remained silent. I took a slow breath. After you left, I kept trying to understand why everything felt so wrong. I thought I was afraid of losing my best friend. I laughed quietly at myself. Then I realized something. Every memory that matters to me has you in it. Every future I ever imagined somehow included you without me even noticing. Liam searched my face carefully, almost as if he was afraid to believe what he was hearing. Ethan, I shook my head gently before he could interrupt. You asked why seeing Noah beside me hurt you so much. I think I finally know why seeing you walk away hurt me even more. The breeze lifted a few fallen leaves across the dock as I continued. Noah is a wonderful person. He reminded me to start drawing again. He reminded me that people can surprise you. But he also unknowingly helped me understand something I should have realized years ago. Every time someone new entered my life, I compared them to you without even knowing I was doing it. Liam let out a quiet breath, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. I never wanted you to choose me because you felt guilty. I am not here because I feel guilty. I met his eyes without looking away. I am here because I cannot picture my happiest future without you standing beside me. And I finally understand that is not just friendship. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Liam smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time since all of this began. You have no idea how many times I imagined hearing those words. I laughed. Probably fewer times than I imagined losing you this week. He shook his head with quiet amusement. You really are late figuring things out. I know. Very late. I know that too. We both laughed, and somehow the tension that had surrounded us for weeks simply disappeared. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no grand speeches or impossible promises. We just stood together watching the sunlight dance across the lake, and for the first time, everything felt honest. On Monday morning, we walked into the office together, carrying coffee just as we always had. Noah noticed immediately and smiled before walking over. Looks like things worked out, he said warmly. I nodded. They did. Noah extended his hand toward Liam. I am glad. Liam shook it with genuine gratitude. So am I. As the morning meeting began, I caught Liam smiling at me from across the conference table, and this time there was no uncertainty hiding behind it. Looking back now, I understand that love does not always arrive like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it quietly grows inside years of ordinary mornings, familiar conversations, shared laughter, and unwavering loyalty until one day, you realize the person who always felt like home was never just your best friend after all. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that Monday morning, but it became wonderfully honest. Instead of wondering what Liam was thinking, I could simply ask him. Instead of pretending certain moments meant nothing, we allowed ourselves to appreciate them for what they really were. Our coworkers noticed the difference long before we ever explained it. We laughed more freely, argued over lunch choices with the same familiar energy as always, and somehow managed to make the office feel lighter without changing who we had always been. Noah became one of the first people to treat our relationship as the most natural thing in the world. One afternoon, he walked past my desk carrying a stack of presentation boards and smiled. So, he said, have you started drawing again? I looked toward Liam, who was reviewing campaign notes at the next desk. Before I could answer, Liam spoke first. He finished 3 sketches this week. Noah raised his eyebrows with an impressed grin. Look at that. Someone has been paying attention. Liam laughed softly. Always. There was no embarrassment in the admission anymore, only quiet confidence. A few weeks later, the community art exhibit finally opened downtown. Noah insisted on coming, along with several coworkers who wanted to support local artists. I almost backed out at the last minute, convinced that my sketches were not good enough to display beside experienced painters and photographers. Liam stood outside the gallery holding 2 cups of coffee, just as he had done so many Saturday mornings before. You know, he said, handing one to me. There is something I have learned after watching you for 15 years. I smiled. What is that? You spend too much time worrying whether you are good enough and not enough time realizing that everyone else already believes in you. His words settled my nerves more effectively than any speech could have. Inside the gallery, people stopped to study my work, asking questions about the landscapes and small coastal towns I had sketched from memory. Some complimented the details. Others shared stories about places that reminded them of home. Watching strangers connect with drawings I had almost left hidden in a closet felt surreal. When the evening ended, one of the organizers approached me and asked whether I would consider participating again next year. I looked at Liam before answering. He simply nodded with the same encouraging smile he had worn since the beginning of the evening. Yes, I replied. I would love to. As we walked back toward the parking lot beneath a sky filled with early evening stars, I realized how different encouragement felt when it came from someone who had believed in me long before I believed in myself. Liam slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and glanced over with a playful smile. See? I told you people would like your work. I laughed. You were right. I usually am. Do not get used to hearing that. He grinned, and the easy rhythm between us returned as naturally as breathing. Looking back on everything that happened, I no longer think Noah entered my life to compete with Liam. He arrived at exactly the right moment to reveal feelings that had been quietly growing for years, helping both of us stop hiding behind the word friendship when our hearts had already chosen something deeper. Sometimes life changes because someone new appears. Other times, that new person simply helps you recognize that the greatest love story was standing beside you all along, patiently waiting for you to finally see what had always been there. As winter slowly settled over the city, I began to appreciate something I had overlooked for most of my life. Happiness was rarely built from extraordinary moments. It was built from ordinary ones repeated with the right person. Liam still arrived outside my apartment with 2 cups of coffee on Saturday mornings, except now he no longer pretended the second cup was simply out of habit. We still argued about football scores, still debated which diners served the best pancakes, and still wandered through bookstores promising each other that we would not buy anything before leaving with at least one new novel tucked under an arm. From the outside, very little had changed. Yet somehow everything felt different because neither of us had to hide behind unspoken feelings anymore. A few days before the holidays, our office organized a small volunteer event at a neighborhood community center. We spent the afternoon decorating classrooms, wrapping donated books, and helping prepare meals for local families. Watching Liam patiently assemble bicycles with a group of children reminded me once again why he had always been the person I admired most. He never looked for attention or praise. He simply noticed what needed to be done and quietly did it. At one point, one of the little boys ran over and asked if Liam was my brother. Before I could answer, Liam smiled warmly and said, "No, I am just someone who has been lucky enough to know him for a very long time." The child nodded as though that explanation made perfect sense before running back to join the others. I laughed softly. That was a careful answer. Liam shrugged with an amused smile. It was also true. Later that afternoon, Noah joined us as everyone cleaned up the last of the decorations. He looked from me to Liam before smiling knowingly. "You both seem lighter these days." I nodded. "I think we finally stopped pretending." Noah laughed. "Good. Life is already complicated enough without hiding from yourselves." Before leaving, he wished us both a happy holiday season and thanked us again for encouraging him to move to the city. As I watched him walk away, I realized how grateful I was for the unexpected role he had played in our story. Some people stay in your life forever. Others arrive for only a season, quietly changing its direction before continuing on their own path. Both kinds of people matter. That evening, Liam and I drove to the overlook just outside town, where we had watched fireworks every 4th of July since high school. The city lights shimmered below us while the first snowflakes of the season drifted gently through the cold night air. Liam slipped his hands into his coat pockets and smiled. "Do you remember what you told me when we were 17? I laughed. Probably something embarrassing. You said that no matter where life took us, you hoped we would always make time for Saturday mornings. I smiled as the memory returned. Looks like we kept that promise. Liam looked at me with the same quiet warmth that had always made me feel understood. We did. Standing there beside him, I realized that the greatest gift life had given us was not simply the chance to fall in love. It was the chance to spend years building trust, loyalty, laughter, and friendship strong enough to become the foundation for something even deeper. Some stories begin with a single glance. Ours began with 15 years of ordinary moments that patiently waited for us to recognize they had been extraordinary all along. Spring arrived quietly, bringing longer afternoons, blooming trees, and a feeling that the entire city had decided to begin again. Our lives settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and completely new. Every Saturday morning still began with 2 cups of coffee, except now we no longer laughed about whose turn it was to pay because we had quietly stopped keeping score. Some evenings we cooked dinner together, discovering that Liam followed recipes with absolute precision while I insisted that every meal needed a little improvisation. We still disagreed about movies, still teased each other over impossible fantasy football predictions, and still found ourselves taking long drives with no destination simply because conversation always seemed easier when the road stretched out in front of us. The biggest surprise was not how much had changed, but how natural everything felt. One afternoon, our company announced that our latest campaign had won a regional marketing award. The entire team gathered at a downtown restaurant to celebrate the achievement. During the dinner, our manager thanked everyone individually, mentioning how well different departments had learned to collaborate over the past several months. When she reached Noah, she smiled warmly. "You brought fresh ideas into this office at exactly the right time." Noah laughed and raised his glass. "I just happened to arrive when everyone else was already building something worth joining." His eyes briefly met mine before shifting toward Liam, and there was an understanding in his smile that needed no explanation. After dinner, Noah walked with us toward the parking garage. Before saying goodbye, he stopped and looked at both of us. "Can I tell you something?" We nodded. "The first week I started working here, I thought Liam disliked me." Liam looked embarrassed. "I never disliked you." Noah chuckled. "I know that now." Eventually, I realized I was standing in the middle of a story that had started years before I arrived. He smiled kindly. "I am glad both of you finally caught up to it." We all laughed together before exchanging farewells. Watching him walk away, I realized that real maturity sometimes meant appreciating people for the role they played in your life instead of measuring how long they stayed. Several weeks later, Liam surprised me by suggesting we revisit the hiking trail where one of our oldest photographs had been taken nearly 8 years earlier. The climb felt just as steep as I remembered, and halfway up the trail Liam complained exactly as he always had. "You know," he said between exaggerated sighs, "one day we are going to become too old for this." I laughed. "You have been saying that since you were 20. I was ahead of my time." When we finally reached the overlook, the valley stretched beneath us in every shade of fresh spring green. I pulled out my sketchbook and began drawing the landscape while Liam sat quietly beside me, enjoying the view without saying much. After a while, he glanced at the page and smiled. "Your drawings have changed." "How?" I asked. "They feel brighter." I looked down at the unfinished sketch before realizing he was right. Somewhere along the way, the colors I imagined had become warmer, the skies wider, and the lights softer than they used to be. Maybe that was what happened when your heart finally stopped carrying unanswered questions. As we packed our things to head back down the mountain, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. The happiest chapters of life are not always the ones where everything is exciting. Sometimes they are simply the chapters where you wake up each morning knowing the person walking beside you has already chosen to stay, and you have finally learned to choose them just as completely in return. Years have passed since I first believed that losing my best friend would be the greatest mistake of my life. Looking back now, I realized that the real mistake would have been allowing fear to keep us from discovering what we had quietly built together over so many ordinary years. Life continued moving forward just as it always does. Deadlines came and went. Seasons changed. New neighbors moved into town while familiar stores closed their doors. Through every unexpected turn, one thing remained beautifully constant. Every Saturday morning, 2 cups of coffee still sat on the kitchen counter before the sun had fully risen. Sometimes we spent the morning reading in comfortable silence. Sometimes we planned weekend road trips to little coastal towns or mountain trails we had never explored before. Other times we simply watched the world wake up from our front porch, grateful that we no longer needed grand adventures to feel happy. At work, our careers continued to grow alongside each other. My artwork slowly became more than a forgotten hobby, eventually appearing in local exhibitions every spring. Liam never missed a single opening night. He would always stand quietly near the back of the gallery, watching visitors stop in front of my sketches with thoughtful expressions. Whenever someone complimented my work, I noticed that Liam looked even prouder than I felt. One evening after another successful exhibit, I asked him why he never seemed surprised anymore. He smiled with the same calm confidence that had carried us through every stage of our lives together. Because I have been watching you become this person for years, he answered. Everyone else is just catching up. His words stayed with me long after the gallery lights dimmed. They reminded me that the people who truly love us often recognize our potential long before we recognize it ourselves. A few months later, Noah accepted a promotion that took him to another city. Before leaving, he invited us to dinner one last time. As we stood outside the restaurant saying goodbye, he laughed and shook his head. I still think it is funny, he admitted. I arrived expecting to start a new job, and somehow I accidentally helped finish someone else's love story. Liam smiled warmly. You gave us the push we needed. I nodded. Thank you for being exactly who you were. Noah grinned. Take good care of each other. We will, we answered together. Watching him drive away, I realized that gratitude is one of the purest forms of happiness because it allows every chapter of life to keep its meaning, even after it ends. Now, whenever someone asks me how Liam and I met, I usually smile before answering that we spent years becoming best friends before either of us understood we were also becoming something more. People often expect love to arrive with dramatic moments or unforgettable first impressions. Our story was different. It grew through shared breakfasts, long conversations, quiet loyalty, inside jokes that nobody else understood, and countless ordinary days that slowly became the foundation of an extraordinary life. If there is one lesson I carry with me after everything we experienced, it is this. Never underestimate the quiet people who consistently choose to stand beside you. Sometimes the greatest love of your life is not waiting somewhere far away. Sometimes they have already been walking beside you through every ordinary day, hoping that one day you will finally recognize that home has never been a place at all. Home has always been a person.